She came back with a little girl, and the cowboy saw his own eyes looking back. The little girl stepped out of the stagecoach holding her mother's hand, and Wade Harlan knew, before anyone spoke, that the past had not come back alone. Morning had only just opened over Briar Creek Ranch. Frost still silvered the fence rails. The horses stood quiet in the corral, their breath drifting white in the cold air. Wade had been crossing the yard with a feed sack over one shoulder when the stagecoach rolled in from the east road, its wheels groaning over frozen ruts. No stage came to his ranch without cause, and no woman stepped down from one looking as if she had carried 12 winters in her chest, unless the cause was heavy. Then he saw her face. Lydia Wren. For a moment the feed sack slipped from his shoulder and hit the ground with a dull thud. A few oats scattered near his boots. Wade did not bend to gather them. He could not move. He had been 23 the last time he saw Lydia, standing beside the white church in Mercy Ridge, wearing a pale blue dress and looking at him like the whole world had just broken in two. Or at least that was how he remembered it. Some memories stay sharp not because they are sweet, but because they cut every time a man touches them. Now she stood before him 12 years later, thinner in the face, older around the eyes, but still Lydia, still carrying that quiet grace that made a room soften when she entered it. Her gloved hand held tight to a little girl beside her. The child was small and straight-backed, maybe 11, with dark hair braided over one shoulder and a traveling coat too plain for the cold. She looked around the ranch with careful eyes, taking in the barn, the windmill, the hitching post, the wide land beyond the creek. Then she looked at Wade. And Wade forgot how to breathe. Those eyes, gray with a green ring near the center, his mother's eyes, his own eyes. The girl tilted her head slightly, the same way Wade did when he was trying to make sense of something he did not trust. She did not smile. She only watched him with a quiet, searching look, as if some part of her had been waiting for this man without knowing his name. Wade's voice came rough. Lydia. Her lips trembled once before she pressed them together. Wade. The sound of his name in her voice stirred something buried deep. Not dead, never dead, just covered by years of work, dust, anger, and lonely nights beside a cold stove. He looked from Lydia to the child, then back again. What are you doing here? Lydia swallowed. Her free hand moved to the small leather satchel at her side, gripping it hard enough that the knuckles showed pale through her glove. I came because I should have come years ago. Wade gave a short, bitter breath. Years ago was when you left without a word. Pain crossed her face, not surprise, not guilt alone, something deeper, something afraid. I left because I was told you sent me away. The wind moved between them, lifting dust from the yard and rattling the loose tin sign above the barn door. Wade stared at her. I never sent you anywhere. The little girl's hand tightened around Lydia's fingers. Lydia closed her eyes for one brief second, as if those 5 words had struck her harder than any shout could have. When she opened them again, tears shone there, but she did not let them fall. Then it was all a lie, she whispered. Wade stepped closer, slow, careful, as if one sudden move might scatter the moment like frightened birds. What was a lie? Lydia looked down at the girl beside her. The child looked up at her mother, brave but frightened now, sensing the grown-up sorrow pressing around them. Her name is Annie, Lydia said softly. Wade's heart beat once hard. Annie. The girl stood straighter, as if her name had placed her in the center of something she did not understand. Annie Wren, Lydia added, then her voice broke just enough to show the truth coming. But she should have been Annie Harlan. The cold morning seemed to still. Even the horses near the corral quieted, one of them shifting a hoof against the packed earth. Wade's eyes dropped to the child again, to the shape of her brow, the stubborn lift of her chin, the same small crease that came between his own eyes when he frowned. "How old?" he asked. Lydia's answer came barely above a whisper. 11. She will be 12 in January. Wade did the counting before he wanted to, before his pride could stop him, before his hurt could protect him. 12 years back. A June wedding that never came. The last spring he had held Lydia under the cottonwoods near Briar Creek, promising her a house with yellow curtains and a porch wide enough for storms. His jaw tightened. "She's mine." It was not a question. Lydia nodded, and this time the tears did fall. "She has always been yours." Annie looked from her mother to Wade. "Mama." Lydia knelt beside her daughter, the hem of her dress brushing the frosted dirt. She took both the child's hands, her own trembling now. "I told you we came to find someone important," she said. Annie glanced at Wade again. Her young face had gone pale, but her eyes did not leave his. "Is he my father?" The word landed in Wade's chest with a force no winter, no drought, no lost herd had ever carried. "Father." He had spent 12 years believing Lydia had chosen a richer life somewhere else. He had told himself he did not care. He had built fences, bought cattle, survived blizzards, and let the town call him a hard but decent man. But no fence could hold back what that little girl's voice did to him. He crouched slowly so he would not tower over her. Dust clung to one knee of his worn trousers. His hat cast a shadow over his face, but not enough to hide the wet shine in his eyes. "I reckon I am," he said gently, "if you can bear hearing it from a man who is only just finding out." Annie studied him. Children raised with secrets learn to listen past words. She seemed to search his face for danger, for anger, for the kind of disappointment she may have feared all her life. Then, very slowly, she let go of Lydia's hand and stepped one pace closer. Wade did not reach for her, he only held still. Annie lifted her small hand and touched the rough leather cuff of his coat, as if testing whether he was real. "You have my eyes," she said. A broken sound left Lydia's throat. Wade looked at his daughter, and the ranch around him blurred. "No," he said softly, "you have mine." For one fragile moment, that was all there was. A man, a woman, and a child standing in a cold ranch yard with 12 lost years between them, and a truth finally breathing in the open. Then Lydia rose, wiping her cheek quickly. "There is more," she said. Wade looked at her and saw fear return behind the tears. "What more?" She glanced toward the road behind the stagecoach. Not toward the past, but toward something that might already be following. "I did not only come to tell you the truth," she said. "I came because the man who kept us apart has found out Annie exists." Wade's face hardened. Before he could ask the name, a rider appeared on the far ridge, black against the pale morning sun. Lydia went still. Annie moved closer to Wade without thinking. And Wade knew, from the fear in Lydia's eyes, that whoever was coming had not ridden all this way to ask forgiveness. The rider came down the ridge at a steady pace, not hurried, not shy, as if the land under his horse already belonged to him. Wade stood without taking his eyes off the man. Annie stayed near his side, close enough that her sleeve brushed his coat. That small touch went through Wade like a promise he had not been given the chance to make until now. Lydia's face had lost nearly all its color. "Who is he?" Wade asked. Her answer came tight. "Preston Vale." The name reached back into Wade's memory like a cold hand. Preston Vale had once been a clerk in the Mercy Ridge Land Office, a thin, smooth-talking man with careful clothes and a smile that never warmed his eyes. Wade remembered him standing near the church steps 12 years ago, always polite, always watching Lydia with a patience that now felt less like affection and more like ownership. "He sent the letter," Lydia whispered. Wade's jaw flexed. The one that said I wanted nothing more to do with you." She nodded, and he showed me another one after I left. Your name signed at the bottom. It said if there was a child, I was never to bring shame to your door. Wade turned sharply toward her. I never wrote such a thing. I know that now, she said, voice breaking. But I was young. I was alone. My father was sick, and Preston was the one holding the travel papers, the money, the address of the aunt he claimed would take me in. I thought you had turned cold because of what people might say. Wade looked down at Annie, then back toward the rider. The girl was listening, trying to stand brave under words no child should have to carry. He lowered his voice. Annie, go with your mother to the porch. But Annie did not move. I don't want to hide. Her voice was small yet steady. Wade felt something in him soften, even in the rising storm of anger. There was courage in her, Lydia's quiet courage and maybe some of his stubbornness too. He crouched again and looked her in the eyes. You are not hiding, he said. You are letting me stand where I should have stood a long time ago. Annie studied him, then slowly nodded. Lydia put an arm around her and guided her to the porch, though she did not go inside. She stood near the steps, one hand on Annie's shoulder, watching the rider draw closer. Preston Vale reined in at the edge of the yard. He had aged better than some men and worse than others. His coat was fine black wool, too fine for the dust. His hat was clean, his boots polished, but the years had narrowed his mouth and sharpened his face. He looked first at Wade, then at Lydia, then at Annie. His gaze lingered on the child's eyes. Well, Preston said, removing one glove finger by finger, so it is true. Wade took one slow step forward. You came a long way to say nothing useful. Preston smiled faintly. Still plain-spoken, Harlan. Some things never improve. Wade did not answer. Preston's eyes slid back to Lydia. Mrs. Wren, you left Silver Falls without settling your affairs. I settled what mattered, Lydia said. You took a child across county lines, without informing the man responsible for your household. Wade's hands curled, but he kept them at his sides. Lydia's voice lifted. You were never responsible for my household. I provided for it when no one else did. You trapped it. That took the smile from Preston's face for the first time. A horse shifted in the corral. The wind pushed against the barn door, making its iron latch tap once, twice, like a warning. Preston turned to Wade. You do not know the history here. I am learning fast. No, Preston said. You are hearing a desperate woman's version of old grief. Lydia came to Silver Falls with no husband and no protection. I gave her a roof. I gave her work. I kept certain facts from becoming public when others would have used them to shame her. Lydia's fingers tightened on Annie's shoulder. You kept the facts hidden because they proved what you had done, she said. Preston's mouth thinned, careful. Wade stepped between them, slow enough not to seem reckless, firm enough to make the point plain. You do not warn her on my land. For a breath, no one spoke. Then Preston reached inside his coat. Lydia gasped, but he only drew out a folded paper. Wade did not relax. Preston held it up. I did not ride here for a scene. I rode here because Mrs. Wren has been living under obligations she cannot simply abandon. There is debt attached to the room she rented, schooling arranged for the girl, and an agreement of guardianship she signed last winter when fever had her laid up for nearly 3 weeks. Lydia's lips parted. That paper was only for emergency care. It was an agreement, Preston said smoothly, and it gives me standing to question whether removing the girl into a strange ranch under a man she has never met is in her best interest. Wade's blood went cold, but his voice stayed quiet. You are not taking my daughter anywhere. My daughter, Preston repeated with a small laugh. That is a large claim for a man who has known her less than an hour. Wade felt the words strike exactly where Preston wanted them to. 12 years gone. 11 years of Annie's life missed. Birthdays, fevers, first steps, first words, all stolen and then thrown back in his face like proof of his absence. Lydia saw the pain cross him. "Wade," she said softly, "don't listen to him." Preston tucked the paper back inside his coat. "I am not taking anyone today. I came to inform you that I will be staying in Mercy Ridge until the court session next week. I suggest Mrs. Wren and the child return with me before this becomes uglier than it needs to be." Annie stepped out from under Lydia's arm. "I'm not going with you." Her voice shook, but she did not step back. Preston looked at her with a softness so false Wade could feel the lie in it. "Annie, you are tired. You do not understand grown matters." "I understand you made Mama cry," she said, "many times." Lydia covered her mouth with one trembling hand. Wade turned his head slightly, looking at his daughter with pride so sudden it hurt. Preston's face changed, only for a second, but Wade saw it. The mask slipped, and beneath it was not concern, it was anger. Then the smile returned. "Children can be taught manners," Preston said. Wade moved before the last word had fully left the man's mouth. He did not touch him. He only walked close enough that Preston's horse tossed its head and stepped back. "You will speak with respect," Wade said, "or you will speak from the road." Preston stared down at him. "You always were too emotional where Lydia was concerned. And you were always too interested in what was never yours." The words landed hard. Preston put his glove back on, each movement slow and controlled. "This county remembers more than you think, Harlan. It remembers your father's unpaid notes. It remembers how near this ranch came to ruin. It remembers how quickly a man can lose land when old papers are brought back into the light." Wade's eyes narrowed. There it was, not just Lydia, not just Annie, the ranch too. "What old papers?" Preston smiled again. "You will find out soon enough." He turned his horse, but before riding away, he looked at Lydia once more. "You should have stayed gone." Then he rode back toward the ridge, leaving the yard colder than it had been. For a long moment, Wade listened to the fading hoofbeats. He had faced drought, winter, sickness in the herd, and men who smiled over bad deals, but this was different. This man had stolen years from him. Now he was threatening the child who had just found him. Behind him, Lydia sank onto the porch step as if her strength had finally left her. Annie stood frozen beside her. Wade turned back. All the anger in him quieted when he saw their faces. Lydia looked like a woman who had run as far as she could and feared the road had followed her anyway. He walked to the porch and stopped 2 steps below her. "Lydia," he said, gentler now, "tell me everything." She looked up at him with wet eyes. "I don't know where to begin." Wade glanced toward the road Preston had taken, then toward Annie. The girl was watching him as if the next words might decide whether she could trust him. He removed his hat and held it against his chest. "Begin with the first lie," he said, "and this time we will not let him finish the story for us." Lydia reached into her satchel with trembling fingers. "I have something," she whispered, "something I kept hidden for years." She pulled out a bundle tied with faded blue ribbon. Wade recognized the ribbon at once. It was the same one she had worn in her hair the night he asked her to marry him. Lydia held the bundle like it might burn her fingers. The faded blue ribbon had lost most of its color, but Wade knew it. He knew the way it had once looked woven through her chestnut hair under the lanterns at the Mercy Ridge harvest dance. He knew how she had laughed when he told her it made her look like the sky had tied itself to her. A man forgets many things in 12 years, but not the small details of the woman he once meant to marry. Lydia placed the bundle on the porch between them. Annie sat beside her mother, quiet as a church mouse, her hands folded tight in her lap. She was trying hard not to look frightened. That made Wade ache more than if she had cried. He lowered himself onto the porch step across from Lydia, leaving space between them. The old boards creaked under his weight. From the corral came the soft blow of a horse and the scrape of a hoof. "What is it?" he asked. Lydia looked at the bundle, then at him. "The letters I thought were yours." Wade went still. She untied the ribbon with careful fingers and unfolded the top paper. The letter was yellowed at the edges, soft from being opened too many times. Wade could see his name written at the bottom. But it was not his hand. Lydia passed it to him. Wade read the first line and felt the morning turn colder. "Lydia, I have thought carefully and decided it is best we end this before both families are harmed." His eyes moved down the page. Every sentence was plain and cruel. It said she had become a burden. It said her father's debts would weaken any marriage. It said Wade could not risk his ranch for a woman whose name carried trouble. Near the end, it warned her not to come looking for him. Wade's fingers tightened until the paper bent. "I did not write this." "I know," Lydia whispered. "I know it now." His voice came low. "How could you believe I would?" Her face folded with pain, not anger, not defense, just hurt that had lived too long in silence. "Because the letter came the same morning my father told me you had been seen speaking with Preston at the land office. Because my mother was weeping in the kitchen. Because Preston arrived before noon and said he was sorry, so sorry, but he had tried to reason with you and could not change your mind." Wade closed his eyes. Preston had not only written a lie, he had built a whole day around it. He had placed people in fear and timing in the right order until the lie felt like truth. Lydia continued, her voice unsteady but clear. "He told me if I stayed in Mercy Ridge, everyone would know you had refused me. He said the kindest thing I could do was leave quietly. My father was already weak from fever, and the bank was pressing him. Preston offered money for travel and said my aunt in Silver Falls would take me in." "Did she?" "No," Lydia gave a small, empty laugh. "There was no aunt waiting. The address led to a boarding house owned by Preston's cousin. By the time I understood, I was sick most mornings and too ashamed to return." Annie looked down at her shoes. "Mama," she said softly, "you never told me that." Lydia turned to her, guilt crossing her face. "I wanted you to grow up without carrying my fear." Annie's mouth trembled, but she nodded. "I carried some of it anyway." Those words settled over the porch like falling snow. Wade looked at his daughter, and a new kind of sorrow opened in him. Annie had not needed the full story to feel its weight. Children always knew when a mother cried behind closed doors. They knew when letters were hidden, when names were avoided, when the past became a locked room no one entered. He wanted to promise her that all of it was over, but he had learned enough about Preston Vale that morning to know easy promises were another kind of lie. Lydia handed Wade another paper. "This one came 2 weeks after I reached Silver Falls." Wade read it and felt heat rise in his chest. This second letter was worse. It carried his forged name at the bottom and said that if Lydia returned with a child, Wade would deny her in front of the whole town. It said he would use every lawman and judge to keep her away from Briar Creek Ranch. It said no child born from a broken engagement would ever be called Harlan. Wade stood so fast the porch board snapped under one boot. Annie flinched. He saw it and forced himself still. "I am sorry," he said, voice strained. "I am not angry at you." Annie looked up. "You are angry at him." Wade folded the letter carefully, though his hands wanted to crush it. "Yes." Lydia wiped her cheek. "I hated you for that letter. Then I loved you anyway. Then I hated myself for still loving you. For years I did not know which pain belonged to which truth." Wade looked at her. The woman sitting on his porch was not the girl he had lost. Time had changed her. Work had worn her hands. Worry had carved soft lines near her eyes. But beneath all of it, he saw the same Lydia who used to stand barefoot in the creek and tease him for being too serious. Only now she had survived alone with his child, and he had not been there. That truth sat between them, heavier than any blame. "I looked for you," he said. Lydia's head lifted. "When?" "3 days after you vanished. I rode to your father's place. He would not speak straight to me. Then I went to the depot. A man there said he saw you board west, so I followed as far as Laramie. After that, the trail died." Lydia stared at him. "Preston told me you never asked after me." Wade gave a hard smile without humor. Preston told many things. For the first time since stepping from the stagecoach, something like anger rose in Lydia's face. It did not make her harsh. It made her look alive. "He stole your search from me too." Wade nodded. "And mine from me." The wind moved the ribbon on the open bundle. Annie reached out and touched it with one finger. "Was this yours, Mama?" Lydia smiled through wet eyes. "I wore it the night your father asked me to dance." Annie glanced at Wade. "Did he dance well?" A small silence followed. Then Lydia laughed. It was quiet, broken at first, but real. "No," she said. "He stepped on my hem twice." Wade looked away, almost smiling despite himself. "I did better by the end of the song." "You did not," Lydia said softly, "but you were very earnest about it." Annie's face changed then. Not fully happy, not yet, but curious. A little piece of fear loosened. She was hearing not only pain now, but proof that before the lies, before the running, before the hidden letters, there had been 2 young people who had loved each other in simple, ordinary ways. The kind of love a child could imagine. Wade sat down again, slower this time. "Do you still have the letters I truly wrote?" Lydia's hand moved to the bottom of the bundle. "Yes." She drew out a smaller stack tied with twine. These pages were more worn than the forged ones, softened by years of being touched. Wade saw his own young handwriting and felt his throat close. Lydia gave them to him. He opened the first. "Liddy, I cut the first boards for our porch today. I know you said yellow curtains, but I am warning you now. I may build the whole house too large just to give those curtains somewhere worthy to hang." The words struck him in a place the false letters had not reached. He remembered writing that by lantern light, sitting on an overturned bucket near the half-built frame of the house he had meant to give her. His voice lowered. "You kept these?" "All of them. Even when you thought I had turned you away." Her eyes met his. "Especially then." That answer nearly undid him. Before he could speak, a wagon rattled faintly on the distant road, heading not toward the ranch but toward town. The sound reminded them both that Preston had not left the story. He had only ridden ahead of it. Wade folded the true letter and placed it gently back in the bundle. "What is the guardianship paper he spoke of?" Lydia's face tightened. "Last winter I caught lung fever. I was too weak to stand for days. Preston brought a doctor and papers. He said Annie needed protection in case I died. I could barely hold the pen, Wade. I signed because he said it was temporary." "Do you have a copy?" "No, he kept it." Wade looked toward the road. Of course he had. Annie spoke then, very quietly. "Mr. Vale said if Mama died, I would live in his house. He said I should be grateful because no one else would want a girl with no proper father." Wade's face went hard in a way Lydia had never seen. He took one breath before answering, because rage would only frighten the child more. "Annie," he said, "look at me." She did. "You have a proper father. He was robbed of knowing you, but he is standing here now. And there is not a man in Mercy Ridge powerful enough to make me unknow you. Annie's eyes filled. Lydia pressed a hand to her mouth. For a moment, Annie fought the tears with all the pride an 11-year-old girl could gather. Then she crossed the porch and stepped into Wade's arms. He held her carefully at first, almost afraid to do it wrong. Then her small hands clutched the back of his coat, and something inside him broke open with a tenderness so sharp it felt like pain. If this moment touched your heart, stay with the story, because some truths arrive gently, but others have to be fought for. Lydia watched them, tears sliding silently down her face. But over Annie's shoulder, Wade saw something on the far road that made the warmth in his chest turn cold again. A second rider had appeared near the fork to town. Not Preston. This one wore a deputy's badge, catching the morning sun. And he was riding straight for Briar Creek Ranch. The deputy rode in with his hat low, and one hand resting near the papers tucked inside his coat. Wade kept Annie close for one more breath before easing back from her. He did not want to let go. Not now. Not after 12 years had been stolen, and one small embrace had given him more truth than all the lonely years before it. But the law was coming up his road, and Preston Vale was not the kind of man who sent the law unless he had already set a trap. Lydia stood, wiping her cheeks quickly with the heel of her hand. Her face had gone pale again, though this time she did not look ready to run. She looked tired of running. "Stay behind me," Wade said. Annie's chin lifted. "I'm not afraid." "I know," his voice softened, "but do it for me anyhow." That reached her. She stepped back beside Lydia, though her eyes stayed fixed on the rider. The deputy reined in near the porch. He was not an old man, perhaps 30, with a square jaw and a sun-browned face. Wade knew him. Deputy Martin Shaw had come to Mercy Ridge 5 years back, after the old sheriff took sick. He was fair enough in small matters, but he had a habit of trusting stamped paper more than living truth. "Morning, Wade," Martin said. "Deputy." Martin's gaze moved to Lydia, then Annie, then back to Wade. He looked uncomfortable, which told Wade the errand had not been his idea. "I hate to come to a man's ranch this early over family business." "Then say what you came to say and be done." Martin shifted in the saddle. Preston Vale came into the sheriff's office with a concern. "He says Mrs. Wren removed a minor child from Silver Falls under questionable standing." Lydia stepped forward. "That is my daughter." Martin touched the brim of his hat. "Ma'am, I understand that. Nobody is saying otherwise this morning." "This morning," Wade repeated. The deputy looked at him. "I am only here to notify you there will be a hearing in Mercy Ridge on Monday. Until then, Mrs. Wren and the child are not to leave the county." A bitter laugh almost left Wade, but he held it down. "So he chases them here, then uses the law to keep them from leaving." Martin's mouth tightened. "I do not make the filings." "No, you just deliver them." Lydia put a hand on Wade's arm. It was the first time she had touched him since returning, and even through his anger he felt it. A light touch, a careful one, yet it steadied him better than any warning could have. "Let him finish," she said quietly. Martin took the folded notice from his coat and held it out. Wade did not take it. Lydia did. Her fingers trembled only slightly as she opened the paper and read. Wade watched her eyes move over the lines. With each line, the last of the morning's softness left her face. "What does it say?" Annie asked. Lydia folded the paper once, too slowly. "It says Mr. Vale is asking the court to review whether I am fit to remain your sole guardian." Annie's face tightened. "But you are my mother." "I know, sweetheart." Martin looked away, ashamed now. Wade stepped down from the porch and walked close enough to the deputy's horse that Martin had to look at him. "You tell Sheriff Bell I expect him to read every paper Preston brings, and not just admire the ink on it." "I will tell him." "And tell him this. If any man thinks he can drag my daughter out of this yard on a lie, he had better bring more than a folded notice. Martin's eyes sharpened. Careful, Wade. I am being careful. That is the only reason we are still talking. The deputy held his gaze for a moment, then exhaled. Monday morning, Church Hall, 9 o'clock. His voice lowered. Bring anything you have, letters, witnesses, proof of old dealings. Preston has already spoken to Judge Harrow. Wade frowned. Harrow owes Preston money. Martin did not answer, which was answer enough. Lydia folded the paper and held it against her chest. Martin turned his horse, then paused. Mrs. Wren. Lydia looked up. For what it is worth, ma'am, my wife had lung fever 2 winters ago. A person signs many things when they think they might not see morning. Court ought to remember that. Then he rode away. The yard grew quiet again, but it was not the same quiet as before. This one had teeth. Wade watched the deputy disappear down the road. His ranch stretched around him, wide and brown under the cold sun. The barn he had repaired by hand. The well he had deepened after the dry summer. The porch boards he had once cut for a house that was supposed to hold Lydia's yellow curtains. He had protected all of it for years. But land suddenly felt like the smaller thing. Lydia sat on the porch step, still holding the notice. Annie stood beside her, trying not to cry. Wade climbed the steps and crouched in front of them. Listen to me, both of you. Monday is not the end. It is just where Preston expects us to be afraid. Lydia's eyes lifted to his. He has had years to prepare, Wade. I have a few letters and a story no one wanted to hear the first time. You have me now. The words came out plain. No grand promise, no sweet speech, just truth. Lydia looked at him, as if those 4 words had reached somewhere she had kept locked for 12 years. Then Annie said, what if the judge believes him? Wade turned to her. Then we find someone the judge has to believe. Who? Wade looked toward town, toward the white steeple barely visible beyond the cottonwoods. Your grandfather. Lydia went still. My father will not help. He might. No, her voice sharpened with old hurt. You do not understand. He was the one who made me leave. He believed Preston. He would not listen to me. Even after Annie was born, even after Mama died, he wrote once and told me not to return unless I could return properly. Wade felt the ache in her words. And did that letter sound like him? Lydia opened her mouth, then stopped. The question hung there. Wade leaned closer. You said Preston built lies with timing, papers, and fear. Maybe he did not only lie to us. Lydia's face changed. A small, terrible hope crossed it, the kind that hurt because it had arrived too late. My father has not spoken to me in 7 years, she whispered. Then he has had 7 years to sit alone with whatever story Preston gave him. Annie looked between them. I have a grandfather. Lydia reached for her hand. Yes. Does he know about me? Lydia's silence answered. Annie looked down. Wade saw the fresh wound forming and hated every man who had helped make it. He will know today, Wade said. Lydia shook her head. Wade, if I walk into his house and he turns Annie away, I do not know if I can bear it. Then I will go first. No, Lydia stood. I have hidden behind fear long enough. If my father is to hear the truth, he should hear it from me. For the first time since she came back, Wade saw the woman she had become apart from him. Not just the girl he lost. Not just the mother who had suffered. A woman who had crossed miles with danger at her back because her daughter deserved a name no man could steal. His voice gentled. I will hitch the wagon. Lydia glanced toward the barn. You do not have to do all this. Wade looked at Annie, then at Lydia. 12 years ago I would have built you a house with my own hands if you had stayed. He paused, the confession rough in his throat. "Let me at least open a door now." Lydia's eyes softened, but she said nothing. Sometimes silence holds more feeling than words can carry. An hour later, the three of them rode toward Mercy Ridge in Wade's wagon. Annie sat between them on the bench, wrapped in one of Wade's old wool blankets. Her shoulder bumped his arm each time the wagon rolled over a rut, and each time she whispered sorry. Each time Wade said, "You are fine." Lydia watched that small exchange with a look she tried to hide. The road to town followed Briar Creek past cottonwoods stripped bare by winter. The water moved dark and cold between thin shelves of ice. In the distance, Mercy Ridge waited with its church steeple, feed store, blacksmith shop, and a main street where every window seemed to hold eyes. By the time Wade pulled the wagon in front of Gideon Wren's old house, two women across the street had already stopped sweeping their porch to stare. Lydia did not move at first. The house had once been bright white. Now the paint had peeled in long strips and the front gate leaned against its post. A dead rose vine twisted beside the steps. Grief lived there. You could see it before anyone opened the door. Annie whispered, "Is this where you grew up?" Lydia nodded. Wade climbed down and came around to help them, but Lydia stepped down on her own. Then she helped Annie. Together, mother and daughter walked through the leaning gate. Wade followed a few steps behind. Lydia raised her hand and knocked. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened. Gideon Wren stood inside, older than Wade remembered, his shoulders bent, his hair white, his eyes still sharp beneath heavy brows. He looked at Lydia first. All the color drained from his face. "My girl," he whispered. Lydia's chin trembled, but she held steady. "Hello, Father." Then Gideon's eyes moved to Annie. The old man stared at the child's face, at her gray-green eyes, at the familiar shape no lie could fully hide. His hand gripped the doorframe. Behind them, a floorboard creaked inside the house. Someone else was there. And before Lydia could speak, Preston Vale stepped out of the front room with a cup of coffee in his hand. "Well," Preston said softly, "this is an unfortunate surprise." Preston Vale stood in Gideon Wren's front room, as if he had been invited by the house itself. The sight of him there struck Lydia harder than his arrival at the ranch. At Briar Creek, he had been a threat riding in from outside. Here, in the home where she had learned to sew, pray, laugh, and keep quiet when grown people were worried, he felt like a shadow that had been waiting in the corners for years. Wade stepped closer behind Lydia, close enough that she could feel his presence, but not so close that he took the moment from her. Gideon Wren's eyes moved between his daughter, the child, Wade, and Preston. The old man looked confused at first, then ashamed, then frightened in a way that made Lydia's anger soften before it had fully risen. "Father," she said, "why is he here?" Gideon's mouth worked once before he answered. "Mr. Vale has been helping me with matters, land taxes, old notes, your mother's final expenses." Preston set his coffee cup down on the small table near the window. The sound of china against wood was too calm for the tension in the room. "Your father has had difficulty keeping his papers in order," Preston said. "I have tried to be a friend." Wade gave a cold look, a friend who comes early and waits in the front room. Preston smiled without warmth. A useful man is often expected early. Lydia kept her eyes on her father. "Did you know I was coming?" Gideon shook his head slowly. "No, I did not." "Then why is he here today?" The old man looked at Preston again, and that one glance told Wade plenty. Gideon Wren was not simply being helped. He was being held. Maybe not with rope, maybe not with a locked door, but with debt, fear, and shame, which could bind an old man just as tightly. Preston stepped forward. "Perhaps this can be discussed privately." "No," Lydia said. Her voice surprised even her. It was firm, steady, no longer the voice of a girl who had been told to leave by men who claimed to know what was best. "No more private words," she continued. "Private words are what ruined us." Annie stood beside her mother, holding the edge of Lydia's sleeve. Her face was pale, but her eyes were fixed on Gideon. Gideon looked at the child, as if he was afraid to hope. "What is her name?" he asked. Lydia's breath caught. "Annie." The old man repeated it softly. "Annie." Annie gave a small nod. "Sir." Something broke in Gideon's face at that polite little word. He opened the door wider. "Come in out of the cold." Preston's expression tightened, but he said nothing. Lydia stepped over the threshold with Annie. Wade entered last, removing his hat. The house smelled of old wood, weak coffee, and cold ashes. On the mantel sat a faded photograph of Lydia's mother, Martha Wren, her face gentle even through the dust on the frame. Lydia saw it and had to look away. She had not been there when her mother died. Preston's lies had made sure of that too. Gideon led them into the front room. No one sat. Preston remained near the window, where the morning light cut across his dark coat. Wade stood near the door, quiet but watchful. Lydia faced her father with Annie beside her. For a moment, the years pressed too hard. Lydia remembered being 19 in this very room, with a traveling bag at her feet and Preston's false letter in her hand. She remembered her father refusing to meet her eyes. She remembered his voice, hoarse with worry, telling her it was best if she left before the town had more to say. Now she understood that he had been wounded by lies too. But understanding did not erase the pain. "I came to tell you the truth," Lydia said. Gideon lowered himself into a chair, as if his legs had failed him. Preston spoke sharply. "Mr. Wren is not well enough for excitement." Wade turned his head, then stopped causing it. Gideon raised one hand weakly. "Let her speak." Lydia opened her satchel and drew out the bundle of letters. She placed them on the table in front of her father. The blue ribbon lay across the top like a memory from a happier life. "These are the letters that sent me away," she said. "The ones I thought Wade wrote, they were false." Gideon stared at the bundle. Preston's face remained smooth, but one hand closed slowly at his side. Lydia untied the ribbon. "This one said Wade did not want me. This one said he would deny Annie if I came back. And this one, Father, this one is the letter you showed me from Mother's cousin in Silver Falls, saying I would be received there." She laid out a third paper. The boarding house was not owned by family. It was owned by Preston's cousin. There was no protection waiting for me, only a room I had to pay for with sewing until my fingers bled. Gideon looked up sharply. "No," Preston said Martha's cousin had written. Lydia's voice softened. "Mother had no cousin in Silver Falls." The old man's lips parted. His eyes moved toward Preston. Preston gave a small sigh, as if disappointed by foolish children. Old family lines are easy to confuse. Mrs. Wren was upset when she left. Her memory of that time cannot be trusted without question. Lydia reached deeper into her satchel. "Then trust Mother's memory." The room went silent. She pulled out a small cloth pouch, worn thin at the seams. Her hands trembled as she opened it and took out one folded sheet, more delicate than the others. The paper had been handled with care but kept hidden for a long time. Gideon saw the handwriting before she spoke. His face changed. "Martha," he whispered. Lydia swallowed the ache in her throat. "She sent this to me 6 years ago, 2 months before she died. I did not answer because I was afraid. I have hated myself for that every day since." Gideon reached for the letter, but his hand shook so badly that Lydia carried it to him. He unfolded it with painful care. Wade watched the old man read. At first, Gideon only frowned. Then his breath began to catch. His eyes moved line by line, and the color drained from his weathered face. "What does it say?" Preston asked too quickly. Gideon did not answer him. He read the last lines, then pressed the paper against his chest. Lydia's voice was quiet. She wrote that she had found drafts, papers in Preston's hand, practice lines copying Wade's name, copies of letters that were never sent. She said she had been afraid to confront him because you owed him money and because he had threatened to reopen old claims against the house. Gideon looked at Preston with a grief so deep it seemed older than anger. "You told me she was ashamed of Lydia," he said. Preston's jaw tightened. Martha was ill. Her mind was not clear near the end. Gideon's voice rose, cracked but strong. "You told me my wife died believing our daughter disgraced us." Lydia covered her mouth. Annie pressed against her side. For the first time, Preston looked trapped. Only for a heartbeat. Then he straightened his coat and gave Gideon a pitying look. "I did what I could to keep your family name from ruin. You were too broken by grief to make hard choices. I made them for you." Wade stepped forward. "There it is." Preston looked at him. "The truth," Wade said. "You never thought they needed protecting. You thought they needed managing." Preston's eyes hardened. "You are one to speak of managing what is yours, Harlan. Your own father nearly lost Briar Creek before you were old enough to sign your name. The county remembers." "Let it remember," Wade said. "I paid every debt that had my family name on it." "Did you?" Preston asked softly. The room shifted. Lydia looked at Wade. Wade did not look away from Preston, but something in his face changed. A small flicker, not fear exactly, recognition. Preston saw it and smiled. "Yes," he said, "that is the part you have not explained to your returning bride and newly discovered daughter." Lydia turned fully toward Wade. "What does he mean?" Wade's throat moved. Preston stepped toward the table, enjoying each word now. Briar Creek Ranch survived because a note was quietly purchased and buried, a note tied to the north pasture and creek access. Wade believes he paid it. Perhaps he even did pay someone, but the original claim rests elsewhere. Gideon stared. "With you?" Preston did not answer directly. Wade's voice came low. "My father's last debt was cleared with the bank in 1881. "With a bank clerk," Preston said, "not with the man who held the transferred note." Lydia looked between them. "You are saying you hold a claim on Wade's ranch." "I am saying Monday's hearing may concern more than guardianship." Annie reached for Wade's hand without looking. The movement was small, instinctive, and it nearly undid him. He closed his fingers around hers. Preston noticed. His smile faded. "You cannot win by playing family in front of a judge," he said. "Paper decides these matters, paper and reputation." Lydia lifted her mother's letter. "Then we will bring paper." Preston's eyes moved to it. "A dying woman's confusion will not save you." "No," Gideon said. Everyone turned toward him. The old man slowly rose from his chair. He looked weaker standing, but there was iron in his face now, old and rusty, but still iron. "No," he repeated, "but my testimony might." Preston's expression went blank. Gideon looked at Lydia, and his eyes filled. "I was a coward," he said. "I let another man tell me what my daughter was worth because I was afraid of losing a house already empty without her. I cannot give back the years. I cannot give your mother back. But I can stand in that church hall and tell every soul in Mercy Ridge who poisoned this family." Lydia began to cry, not loudly, not helplessly, just with the sudden pain of a daughter hearing words she had needed for half her life. Annie stepped forward slowly. "Are you my grandfather?" Gideon looked down at her, and all the hardness left him. "If you will allow an old fool to be," he said. Annie studied him, then nodded. I think Mama needs one too. Gideon covered his eyes with one hand. For a moment, even Wade had to look away. If you believe one honest confession can begin healing years of pain, stay close to this story, because the hardest truth has not reached the church hall yet. Preston picked up his hat. You are all very moved, he said quietly, but moved people make mistakes. Wade turned toward him. Preston walked to the door, then paused beside Lydia. Monday will come, he said, and when it does, you had better hope every paper in your hands is stronger than the ones in mine. He left the house without another word. They heard his boots cross the porch, then his horse moving away down the street. Only after the sound faded did Gideon sink back into his chair. Wade looked at him. What papers does he mean? Gideon's eyes lowered to the floorboards. The North Pasture note, he whispered. I know where the truth of it may be. Lydia held her breath. Gideon looked toward the old roll-top desk in the corner, the one Martha Wren had kept locked when Lydia was a girl. Your mother hid something before she died, he said. She told me there would come a day when the blue ribbon returned to this house. Lydia went still. Gideon's voice shook. I thought grief had made her strange. Now I think she was waiting for you. Gideon Wren stared at the old roll-top desk as if it were not furniture, but a grave he had been afraid to open. The room held still around him. Lydia stood with her mother's letter pressed against her chest. Annie stayed close to Wade, one small hand still holding two of his fingers. Wade did not move. That little hand had become the only peaceful thing in a day full of old wounds. What did Martha hide? Lydia asked. Gideon swallowed. I do not know, not all of it. You never looked. His eyes filled with shame. She made me promise not to. She said if I opened it too soon, Preston would know. I thought fever had made her fearful. I thought she was seeing enemies in shadows. Lydia's voice softened, but it carried pain. She was seeing the truth. The old man nodded once, broken by it. He reached into his vest pocket and drew out a small brass key darkened with age. He held it for a long moment before offering it to Lydia. Your mother said this belonged to you when you came home with the blue ribbon. Lydia looked down at the faded ribbon lying on the table. For years, she had carried it as a piece of her lost love. Now it felt like her mother had turned it into a lantern, waiting all this time to guide her back. She took the key. Her hand trembled. Wade stepped near her, not touching, just close enough to let her feel she was not alone. Lydia looked at him once, and the small look between them carried more than words. Fear, hope, the ache of lost years, the fragile beginning of trust being rebuilt one breath at a time. She crossed to the desk. The roll-top stuck at first. The wood had swollen with age and neglect. Gideon rose to help, but Wade reached it first and eased the cover upward with slow pressure. It rattled open, releasing the smell of dust, paper, and cedar oil. Inside were old ledgers, a cracked ink bottle, dull pencils, and small pigeonholes stuffed with receipts. Lydia remembered standing beside this desk as a girl while her mother wrote letters by lamplight. Martha Wren had always kept everything neat, every bill folded square, every ribbon rolled, every needle returned to its cushion. Now the desk looked like a life interrupted. Where? Lydia whispered. Gideon pointed to the lower right drawer. She said the drawer would not open unless the heart came home. Annie frowned. The heart. Lydia looked at the blue ribbon again. Then she saw it. At one end of the ribbon, barely visible where the cloth had frayed, her mother had sewn a tiny silver charm shaped like a heart. Lydia had never noticed it as more than decoration. She touched it now and felt a hard edge under the thread. With careful fingers, she worked the charm loose. A thin, flat piece of metal slid out from inside the cloth. Not a charm. A second key. Gideon covered his mouth. Martha. Lydia knelt before the lower drawer. The brass key opened the first lock. The tiny silver key opened a smaller one hidden beneath the handle. The drawer gave a soft click. When Lydia pulled it open, the first thing she saw was a folded square of blue cloth. Her wedding cloth. Not the dress. That had never been finished, but a piece of the pale blue material her mother had saved for the cuffs, cut and folded around something flat. Lydia lifted it with both hands. Inside lay 3 documents and a small photograph. The photograph was of Lydia at 19, standing beside Wade near Briar Creek, both of them young and sunlit, his hat tilted back, her smile shy and bright. Wade remembered the day. A church picnic late spring before everything broke apart. He had kept his own copy for years in a cigar box, never knowing Martha had kept one too. Annie leaned closer. "Is that you?" Lydia smiled sadly. "Yes." Annie looked at Wade in the photograph, then at the man beside her. "You looked less serious." Wade gave a quiet breath that almost became a laugh. "I had fewer reasons to be serious then." Lydia's thumb brushed the photograph. "So did I." For one tender second, the whole room seemed to soften. Even Gideon looked at the picture like he was seeing not a scandal, not a mistake, but 2 children he had failed to protect. Then Wade noticed the top paper beneath it. His name was written there. So was Preston Vale's. Lydia unfolded it. The paper was a transfer record from the Mercy Ridge Bank, dated 12 years earlier. It showed a private note tied to Briar Creek's north pasture had been purchased not by Preston, but by Martha Wren. Lydia stared at it. "Mother bought your father's debt." Wade looked at Gideon. The old man shook his head, stunned. "I never knew." Wade took the paper carefully. He read every line, then read it again. His father's name was there. The pasture claim, the creek access, the amount owed, then Martha Wren's signature, clean and certain. "She saved Briar Creek," Wade said quietly. Lydia frowned. Why would she keep that hidden? Gideon reached for the second paper. "Because of this." It was a letter from Martha to her husband, never sent. Lydia read it aloud, her voice shaking. "Gideon, I have paid the Harlan note with the money my sister left me. I did it because Preston was circling that ranch like a hawk and because I believe Wade Harlan loves our daughter true. If Lydia marries him, let this be part of her dowry, though I do not want the boy shamed by knowing we saved his land. If trouble comes, keep this safe. Preston must never touch the north pasture." Wade turned away, overcome. All those years, he had believed he had saved the ranch alone. He had worn pride like armor, paid debts, worked until his hands cracked in winter, and told himself no one had ever helped him. But Martha Wren had quietly protected his land because she believed in the love he had for her daughter. Lydia looked at him. "Wade." He shook his head once, not in refusal, but because he could not speak yet. Annie looked worried. "Did Grandma Martha do something bad?" Gideon answered before anyone else could. "No, child, she did something kind." Wade turned back then. His eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. "She did something that may save us now." The third document was folded inside a bank envelope. Lydia opened it and found a receipt showing Martha had paid the note in full. Attached to it was a statement from the bank clerk confirming the transfer had been settled and released. At the bottom was another handwriting. Preston Vale S. Received for filing. But the final stamp was missing. Wade understood first. He never filed the release. Lydia's eyes lifted. He kept the ranch debt alive on paper. Gideon's face darkened with late-rising fury, so he could use it when he needed to. "Against Wade," Lydia said. "And against you," Wade added. "If he could make me look like a desperate man holding debt-clouded land, He could tell a Judge Briar Creek was no safe place for Annie. Annie stepped closer to the desk. Can that paper stop him? Wade looked at the release, then at the girl who had only just learned to call him father in her heart, even if not yet aloud. It can help. Lydia folded the documents carefully. We need more than help. Preston said his papers were strong. Gideon gripped the arm of his chair. There may be one living man who can prove this, Elias Mercer. Wade turned, the old bank clerk. He handled the note transfer, Gideon said. He left the bank after Preston became land assessor. Lives out past Willow Draw now, unless he has passed. He is alive, Wade said. I bought seed barley from him last fall. Lydia held the papers against her heart. Will he speak? Gideon's mouth tightened. If he is not afraid. Wade reached for his hat. Then we ask before Preston gets to him. Lydia moved toward the door too. Wade paused. You should stay here with Annie. Her eyes flashed. No. Lydia. No, Wade. I stayed behind once because men told me it was safer. I lost 12 years. I will not sit in another room while the truth rides without me. The room fell quiet. Wade looked at her, and despite the danger, something warm moved through him. This was not the frightened girl Preston had pushed onto a false road. This was a mother who had crossed half a territory with secrets in her satchel and courage in every step. He nodded. Then we go together. Annie lifted her chin. I'm going too. Lydia began, sweetheart, but Annie shook her head. I heard Mr. Vale say grown matters were not for me, but I am the matter. I want to know who is telling the truth. Wade looked at Lydia. The choice was hers. Lydia's face softened with worry but also pride. You stay close to me, always. I will. Gideon stood slowly. I am coming as well. You should rest, Lydia said. I rested for 12 years while lies did my speaking. His voice shook but did not break. No more. They left the Wren house together, carrying the hidden papers, the blue ribbon, and Martha Wren's last quiet gift. Outside, Mercy Ridge had begun to stir. 2 women at the mercantile stopped talking when they saw Lydia. A man near the hitching rail touched his hat to Wade but stared too long at Annie. Whispers moved faster than wagon wheels. Preston had counted on shame to weaken them. But walking together down that street, Lydia with her daughter, Wade at her side, Gideon behind them, they did not look like shame. They looked like a family arriving late, but arriving. The ride to Willow Draw took them past dry grass, bare cottonwoods, and low hills the color of old leather. Annie sat in the back of the wagon with Lydia, the blanket around her shoulders. Wade drove, with Gideon beside him holding the documents inside his coat. For a while no one spoke. Then Lydia leaned forward and said softly, Wade. He glanced back. I never thanked you for what you said to Annie, about not being able to unknow her. His hands tightened on the reins. I meant it. I know. The words were simple, but her voice carried something tender. It reached him like sunlight through a boarded window. He looked back at the road. I missed everything. You did not choose to. That does not make the missing smaller. No, she said, but it may make the years ahead matter more. Wade let those words settle. Annie watched them both, quiet and thoughtful. Near noon, they reached Elias Mercer's place, a small weathered cabin set beside a line of willow trees. Smoke rose from the chimney. A mule stood near the shed, chewing at a fence rail. Wade stopped the wagon. Before he could climb down, the cabin door opened. Elias Mercer stepped out with a shotgun held low in both hands. He was older now, bent at the shoulders, his white beard wild, but his eyes were sharp and troubled. I wondered how long before someone came, Elias called. Wade kept his hands visible. We came to ask about an old bank note. Elias looked at Lydia, then Gideon, then Annie. His face changed when he saw the child's eyes. "Lord help us," he whispered. "Martha was right." Lydia stepped down from the wagon. "What did my mother know?" Elias lowered the shotgun slowly. "She knew Preston Vale had been copying signatures for years," he said, "and she knew the first name he learned to copy was Wade Harlan S." A cold wind moved through the willow trees. Wade's voice came hard. "Can you prove it?" Elias looked toward his cabin, fear working in his face. "I can," he said, "but Preston came here before sunrise." Lydia's breath caught. Elias opened his coat and pulled out a torn piece of ledger paper, stained at one corner with fresh mud. "He took the ledger," Elias said, "but he did not know I had already torn out the page that could ruin him." Elias Mercer held the torn ledger page, as if it weighed more than paper ever should. The wind worried at the edges of it, snapping one corner against his knuckles. Wade stepped closer, but not too close. The old banker's hands were shaking, and a frightened man could mistake help for pressure. Lydia stood beside the wagon with Annie half behind her skirt. Gideon had climbed down more slowly, one hand pressed against his ribs, his face gray from the ride, and the shock of hearing Martha's name spoken like a warning from the grave. "What is on that page?" Wade asked. Elias looked past him toward the road, as if expecting Preston Vale to appear from the cottonwoods. "Proof," he said, "and maybe my last chance to make right what I let go wrong." Lydia's voice softened. "Mr. Mercer, what did you let go wrong?" The old man's eyes moved to her. "I was clerk at Mercy Ridge Bank when your mother bought the note on Briar Creek's north pasture. I handled the transfer. I saw her pay it with money she had kept separate from your father's accounts. She told me it was to be filed clean and quiet." "And it was not," Wade said. Elias lowered his eyes. "No." "Why?" Elias swallowed hard. "Because Preston Vale came in 2 days later with a county seal and a smile. Said the filing had an error. Said he would carry it to the land office himself. I was young enough to believe a man in a good coat and vain enough to think I understood power because I kept ledgers straight." Wade's face tightened. Elias looked at him, shame plain now. "Your ranch should have been free of that note 12 years ago. I knew it later. Not that day, but later. By then Preston had the land office, the bank had changed hands, and I had a wife sick at home. He reminded me often how mistakes could cost a man his position." Lydia looked down at the paper. "So you stayed silent." "I did," Elias' voice broke, and every year after silence grew heavier. Annie stepped from behind Lydia just enough to be seen. "Did my grandmother know?" Elias blinked at the child, then his face softened with pain. "She knew enough. Martha Wren came to me before she died, thin as a rail, wrapped in a gray shawl, coughing into a handkerchief she kept trying to hide. She asked me whether Preston had filed the release. I lied first." Gideon made a sound like grief had struck him. Elias looked at him. "I am sorry, Gideon, I was a coward." Gideon's answer came rough. "There seems to have been plenty of that to go around." No one argued. Elias unfolded the torn page. "This is from my private copy ledger. The bank kept official books, but I kept notes of transfers for my own records. Dates, signatures, who carried what, who witnessed. Preston never knew I made a habit of it." Wade took the page carefully when Elias offered it. The writing was faded but clear. Martha Wren's payment, the release of the Briar Creek North pasture note, Elias Mercer's witness mark, then a line in smaller script. "Release taken by P. Vale for land office filing, not returned." Wade read it twice, then handed it to Lydia. Her mouth tightened as she saw her mother's name. "She tried to protect us even after she thought she had failed," Lydia whispered. Gideon looked away toward the willow trees. "She did not fail, I did." Annie reached for her grandfather's hand. It was a small gesture, uncertain and shy. Gideon looked down at her fingers around his and began to cry without making a sound. For a few heartbeats, even the cold wind seemed gentle. Then Elia spoke again. "There is more." Wade's eyes lifted. Elia's motion toward the cabin. "Come inside, quickly." They followed him in. The cabin was spare and dim, with one narrow bed, a table, a black stove, and shelves stacked with old account books. A kettle sat cold on the stove. Mud marked the floor near the door, fresh and dark. Preston had been there. Elias shut the door and dropped the bar across it. "He came before sunrise," Elias said. "2 men with him, not lawmen, paid hands. They searched every shelf. Took the bank ledger I kept from those years, thought that would settle it." Wade glanced at the fresh scrape along the floorboards. "Did they hurt you?" Elias gave a humorless smile. "Only my pride and my door latch. I told them age had made me forgetful. Preston believed that because men like him enjoy thinking others are smaller than they are." He crossed to the stove, knelt with difficulty, and reached behind a loose brick near the hearth. His fingers worked slowly until the brick shifted free. From the hollow behind it, he pulled a cloth-wrapped packet. Lydia drew in a breath. Elias set the packet on the table and opened it. Inside were 3 practice sheets covered in copied names. Wade Harlan, Martha Wren, Gideon Wren, Lydia Wren. Some signatures were crooked, early attempts. Others were chillingly close. Annie stared at them. He practiced stealing people. Wade looked at her. No grown person in the room could have said it plainer. "Yes," Wade said softly, "that is exactly what he did." Elias placed one finger on a sheet. "Martha gave me these. Said she found them tucked behind papers Preston had left for your father after a tax meeting. She made copies by hand and kept the originals hidden. I held the copies. She kept the originals." Lydia stiffened. "The originals may still be in the desk." "Or Preston found them already," Gideon said. "No," Lydia said, thinking fast. "Mother told you the blue ribbon would return. She hid the keys inside it. If she had hidden the documents in the desk, she would not leave the worst proof somewhere Preston could guess." Wade watched her, seeing the sharp mind grief had never taken from her. "She hid them somewhere only you would know." Lydia closed her eyes. The house in Mercy Ridge rose in her memory. The sewing room, the pantry, the porch swing, her mother's Bible, the cedar chest, the loose board near the kitchen stove where Lydia once hid peppermint candy as a child. Then one memory struck her. Not the house. The church. Her mother had sewn Lydia's wedding dress in the church quilting room because the light was better there in the afternoons. After Lydia left, Martha had gone there alone for weeks, people said, to finish charity quilts and keep her hands busy. Lydia opened her eyes. "The church hall." Wade leaned closer. "What about it?" "There was an old sewing cabinet in the back room. Mother kept scraps there. Buttons, lace, thread. She told me once that women hide more truth in sewing boxes than men ever think to search." Elias nodded slowly. "That sounds like Martha." Gideon wiped his eyes with a trembling hand. "The cabinet is still there. Reverend's wife uses it for altar cloths." Wade folded the ledger page and practice sheets into the packet. "Then we go back before Preston does." Elias reached for his coat. "I am coming." "You are safer here," Wade said. "I was safer silent," Elias replied. "Look what that bought everyone." There was no answer to that. They left the cabin with the packet hidden inside Lydia's satchel, under the old blue ribbon and her true letters from Wade. Elias rode his mule beside the wagon, looking small beneath the wide, pale sky, but straighter than he had when they arrived. The road back to Mercy Ridge felt longer. Annie sat close to Lydia, but her eyes kept moving to Wade's back as he drove. After a while, she leaned forward. Mr. Harlan. The title struck him strangely now. He looked over his shoulder. Yes. She hesitated. What should I call you? The reins shifted in Wade's hands. Lydia looked at her daughter, then at Wade. The question was simple, innocent, and sharp enough to cut through all the legal fear waiting ahead. Wade slowed the wagon a little. You can call me Wade as long as you need, he said carefully. And if one day you want to call me something else, I will be honored, but I will not ask it from you like a debt. Annie considered that. My friend Elsie calls her father Pa. Wade's eyes turned back to the road, but his voice was rough when he answered. That is a fine word. Annie nodded, thinking. She did not say it. Not yet. But a few minutes later, when the wagon jolted over a rut and she reached forward to steady herself, her hand landed lightly on his shoulder. She did not pull it back right away. Lydia saw Wade's face from the side. The hard rancher of Briar Creek had survived winters that buried cattle, debts that bent men low, and loneliness that hollowed a house. But that small hand on his shoulder nearly broke him. By late afternoon, the church steeple came into view. Mercy Ridge looked ordinary from a distance. Smoke from chimneys, wagons near the feed store, children chasing one another past the schoolhouse. But as they rolled onto Main Street, the ordinary faded. People stopped. Faces turned. Whispers moved from porch to porch. Preston Vale stood outside the land office, speaking with Judge Harrow. He saw the wagon. He saw Elias Mercer riding beside it. For the first time all day, Preston's confidence faltered in the open where everyone could see. Wade noticed. So did Lydia. Judge Harrow turned as well, his round face tightening with displeasure. Preston murmured something to him, but his eyes did not leave the wagon. Wade drove past without stopping. The church sat at the north end of town, white paint peeling, bell tower bright in the low sun. Reverend Amos Bell came out as they arrived, wiping his hands on a cloth, surprise lifting his brows. Wade, Lydia Wren. He looked at Gideon, then Elias, then Annie. Mercy, what storm has blown in with all of you? Lydia stepped down. One that should have been faced 12 years ago, she said. The Reverend's expression sobered. We need the back room, Wade said, and an old sewing cabinet if it is still here. Reverend Bell looked from one face to another. Then he opened the church door. Then come in. The church smelled of beeswax, hymnals, and winter coats. Sunlight fell through plain glass windows in long golden bars. Annie slowed as they entered, her small boots quiet on the wooden floor. Lydia paused near the aisle. In 2 days, this same room would hold the hearing. Preston would stand here with his papers, his polished words, and his borrowed law. The whole town might come to watch, hungry for truth or scandal, depending on the heart that brought them. Wade saw her stop. You all right? She looked toward the front pew. I was supposed to marry you here. His face softened. I know. For years, I could not even think of this room without feeling ashamed. You have nothing to be ashamed of. She turned to him, and for one quiet moment the church around them disappeared. There was only the man she had loved before lies taught her fear, and the man who now stood beside her without asking for anything she was not ready to give. I am trying to believe that, she whispered. Wade reached out slowly and took her hand. Not like a claim. Like a shelter. You do not have to believe it all at once. Lydia looked down at their joined hands. His palm was rough, warm, familiar in a way that hurt and healed together. Then Annie's voice came from the back room. Mama. Lydia and Wade turned at once. Annie stood beside the old sewing cabinet, its lower door open. In her hand was a small cloth pouch tied with pale blue thread. Her face was pale. "There's a letter inside," she said, "and it has my name on it." The cloth pouch in Annie's hand seemed too small to hold the power it carried. Lydia crossed the back room quickly, her boots tapping against the worn church floor. Wade followed close behind. Gideon leaned one hand against the doorway, breathing hard from the walk through town, while Elias Mercer stood near the wall with his hat clutched to his chest. The sewing cabinet sat beneath a narrow window, exactly where Lydia remembered it. Its varnish had dulled. One hinge sagged. Scraps of altar cloth, old thread, and spare buttons filled the top shelves, but the lower compartment had a false back Annie had found by accident when her hand brushed a loose panel. Lydia stopped in front of her daughter. "Let me see, sweetheart." Annie gave her the pouch. The pale blue thread around it matched the wedding cloth hidden in Martha's desk. Lydia worked the knot loose with shaking fingers. Inside was a folded letter, a small tin type wrapped in tissue, and two narrow papers sealed with red wax. The letter was addressed in Martha Wren's hand. "To my granddaughter, if Lydia ever brings her home." Lydia covered her mouth. Annie stared at the words. "She knew about me." Gideon made a broken sound from the doorway. Lydia unfolded the letter carefully. The paper was thin, the ink faded brown, but the words were clear enough. "My dear little one," Lydia read, her voice trembling, "if this letter has reached your hands, then your mother has found the courage I always prayed she would find, and you have come back to the place where your story was meant to begin." Annie's eyes filled at once. Lydia struggled, then kept reading. "I do not know your name, I do not know your face, but I know you are not a shame, not a mistake, and not a secret God meant to be buried. You are the child of love. Do not let any bitter man tell you otherwise." The room went quiet. Even Reverend Bell, standing just inside the doorway now, bowed his head. Wade looked away, his jaw tight. He had known Martha Wren as a kind woman with soft hands and a firm voice. He had never known she had fought for them from behind doors, with paper, thread, memory, and a mother's quiet courage. Annie stepped closer to Lydia, tears slipping down her cheeks. "She wrote that for me before she died." "Yes," Lydia whispered, "she loved you without meeting you." Annie pressed one hand to her chest, as if trying to hold the words in place. Lydia read the rest. "In this pouch are the papers Preston Vale feared most. I saw him forge Wade Harlan's name. I saw the first practice sheets by accident and understood too late what he had done to my daughter. I copied what I could. I also kept the original notice he meant to file against Briar Creek Ranch, with his false claim and false witness marks. If this reaches the church, let it be opened before God and neighbors, where private lies cannot hide." Lydia lowered the letter. Wade's eyes moved to the sealed papers. Elias whispered, "The original claim." Reverend Bell crossed the room and looked at the wax seals. "Martha asked me once if a paper left in the church could be considered safe from greedy hands. I thought she meant donation records." Gideon covered his face. "She was alone with the truth, and I called it fever." Lydia went to him and placed the letter in his hands. "She knew you were afraid," she said softly. "She did not stop loving you for it." The old man wept then, not loudly, not with drama, just the weary crying of a father and husband who had finally reached the end of his excuses. Annie touched his sleeve. "Grandma Martha still helped us." Gideon nodded, unable to speak. Wade lifted one of the sealed papers but did not break it. "This should be opened at the hearing." Lydia looked at him. "What if Preston steals it before Monday?" "He will try," Elias said. Everyone turned toward him. The old clerk's face was grave. "He came to my cabin before sunrise because he knew proof still existed. If he saw us come here, he will guess Martha hid more than one thing. Reverend Bell straightened. Then the papers stay with me tonight. Wade shook his head. No offense, Reverend, but Preston has walked into too many rooms where people thought papers were safe. The Reverend did not argue. Lydia looked at the little tin type still wrapped in tissue. She opened it carefully. It showed Martha Wren sitting in a chair near the church window, sewing cloth in her lap. Beside her stood a young Lydia in her pale blue dress, not yet finished, smiling at someone beyond the camera. On the back, Martha had written one sentence. For the day love is allowed to come home. Lydia's shoulders trembled. Wade stepped closer, and this time when he put a hand lightly against her back, she did not move away. She leaned into the touch just enough for him to feel it, just enough to say without words that the distance between them was no longer made of distrust. It was made only of grief, and grief could be crossed slowly. Annie watched them. A small, hopeful look came into her face. Then heavy footsteps sounded in the church entry. All of them turned. Deputy Martin Shaw appeared in the doorway, breathing hard, his coat open, dust on his boots. His eyes moved over the room, the open cabinet, the pouch, the papers. Good, he said, I found you first. Wade stepped in front of Lydia and Annie. First. Martin nodded. Preston is gathering men at the land office. Says stolen documents are being hidden in the church. Reverend Bell's face darkened. Stolen from whom? From him, according to his story. Wade gave a hard breath. Of course. Martin looked at Lydia. Mrs. Wren, I need to ask plainly, do those papers belong to you? Lydia lifted her chin. They were hidden by my mother, addressed to my daughter, and written to expose the man who ruined our family. That is not a legal answer. No, Wade said, it is an honest one. Martin's mouth tightened. I am trying to help you. If Preston comes with Judge Harrow and claims these are stolen, I may be ordered to take them. Annie's hand found Wade's sleeve. Can they do that? Wade looked at Martin. The deputy hesitated, and that hesitation answered. Lydia held the pouch against her chest. Then what do we do? For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Reverend Bell turned toward the sanctuary. We ring the bell. Gideon looked up. For what? For witnesses, the Reverend said. If Preston wants this to become public before Monday, then let it become public now. Not in his office, not under Judge Harrow's private eye, here, in the church, in front of Mercy Ridge. Martin frowned. Reverend, that could make this worse. It has been made worse for 12 years by quiet rooms, Reverend Bell said. I am finished with quiet rooms. Wade looked at Lydia. The choice rested with her again. He would have taken the papers and ridden into the hills if she asked it. He would have faced Preston alone if she wished. But he understood now that love did not mean deciding for her. That was the same old sin Preston had committed under a softer name. Lydia, he said, tell me what you want. She looked down at Annie. Her daughter's face was wet, frightened, but watching, learning. This moment would teach her something about fear, about truth, about what a woman did when men tried to bury her story. Lydia placed Martha's letter back in the pouch. Then she turned to Reverend Bell. Ring it. The Reverend walked to the front of the church and pulled the bell rope. The first peal rolled out over Mercy Ridge, deep and sudden. It shook dust from the rafters and sent pigeons lifting from the roof. A second peal followed, then a third. Outside, voices rose. Doors opened along the street. The town began to gather. Lydia took Annie's hand, then looked at Wade. Will you stand with us? Wade's answer was quiet, as long as I have breath. They walked from the back room into the sanctuary together, Lydia on one side of Annie, Wade on the other. Gideon followed with Martha's letter. Elias carried the ledger page. Reverend Bell stood near the pulpit, his face stern. Deputy Martin remained by the door, torn between order and conscience. People began entering in twos and threes. The mercantile women, the blacksmith, the school teacher, ranch hands, farmers, wives with shawls around their shoulders, men with hats in their hands. Whispers filled the pews, but they softened when folks saw Annie standing between Lydia and Wade. A child had a way of making gossip look cruel. Then Preston Vale entered. Judge Harrow came with him, round-faced and displeased. Two men followed behind, both broad-shouldered, both wearing the blank look of men paid to stand near power. Preston's eyes found the pouch in Lydia's hand. For one brief second, something like fear moved across his face. Then he smiled. "Reverend Bell," he said, his voice carrying through the church, "I understand you are sheltering stolen legal property." The Reverend stepped down from the pulpit. "I am sheltering people." Judge Harrow cleared his throat. "This is irregular." "So was forging a young man's name to break an engagement," Elias said. A murmur moved through the room. Preston's eyes flashed toward him. "Old man, mind your words." Elias stood straighter. "I should have minded them 12 years ago." Lydia felt Wade's hand brush hers, not holding it yet, just near, a quiet strength. Preston turned to the room, playing to the faces in the pews. "You are all being drawn into a private scandal by a woman who left this town in disgrace and returns now with a child and a convenient story." Wade moved, but Lydia touched his arm. "No," she whispered, "let me." She stepped forward. Her hands were trembling, everyone could see it, but her voice when it came was clear. "I did leave this town," she said. "I left because I was shown letters that told me the man I loved had rejected me. I left because I was young, frightened, and made to believe my child would be hated before she was even born. I have been ashamed for 12 years. But today I learned shame was the last lie Preston Vale gave me, and I will not carry it another step." The church went silent. Annie looked up at her mother with shining eyes. Lydia opened the pouch. "If you believe I came back to steal something," she said, looking straight at Preston, "then let Mercy Ridge see what my mother hid in this church." Preston's smile vanished. Judge Harrow stepped forward. "Mrs. Wren, I advise you not to open disputed documents outside proper court order." Wade's voice cut through the room. "Judge, if the papers are false, you have nothing to fear." A few men in the pews murmured agreement. Lydia broke the first red wax seal. The sound was tiny, but Preston flinched as if it had been thunder. The broken seal lay on the church floor like a small red wound. Lydia unfolded the first document with both hands. The paper crackled in the silence. Every eye in Mercy Ridge seemed fixed on that single sheet, yet Lydia felt oddly alone for one breath, as if she were standing again at 19 with a packed bag and no one willing to ask whether the story made sense. Then Annie's hand slipped into hers. That little grip brought her back. Lydia looked at Wade. He stood a pace behind her, solid as a fence post in hard wind, but his eyes were not hard. They were steady, patient, waiting on her choice. For 12 years, men had used paper to move her life without asking what she wanted. Now the paper was in her hands. She read the top line. Notice of claim transfer against North Pasture and Creek access of Briar Creek Ranch. A murmur passed through the room. Judge Harrow stepped forward, his face tight. "That sounds like land business, not a matter for public display." Reverend Bell answered before Wade could. "This church hall has hosted half the land hearings in Mercy Ridge. I reckon the walls know the language." A few quiet voices agreed. Lydia continued reading. Filed by Preston Vale, acting witness and county land representative. Preston held up one hand, trying to appear calm. A lawful notice, old perhaps and never enforced. Elias Mercer spoke from near the front pew. Not lawful if it carried false marks. Lydia turned the paper toward the room. Near the bottom were 2 witness signatures. Elias Mercer. Martha Wren. Elias took 1 step forward, his aged face pale with anger. I did not sign that claim. Martha Wren did not sign it either. She had already paid the note release. That paper was created to make a settled debt look alive. Preston laughed softly. And we are to trust your memory from 12 years ago. No, Elias said. He lifted the torn ledger page. You are to trust my record from 12 years ago. The room stirred again, louder this time. Judge Harrow reached for the ledger page. Let me see that. Elias held it back. With respect, Judge, you will see it when everyone else does. Harrow's cheeks reddened. This is disorder. Wade's voice came low from beside Lydia. Truth often looks disorderly to men who prefer closed doors. That sent another sound through the pews. Not laughter, something sharper, agreement beginning to find its courage. Lydia opened the second sealed paper. This one was smaller. Inside was a signed statement written in Martha Wren's hand, with Reverend Bell's name listed as witness for the sealed packet, though not the content. It named the practice sheets. It named the forged letters. It named Preston Vale as the man Martha had seen copying Wade's hand after Lydia disappeared. Lydia's voice trembled as she read, but she did not stop. My daughter was driven from this town by a lie. Wade Harlan was robbed of his bride, and should there be a child, as I believe there may be, robbed of his blood. I have waited for courage and found too little while living. So I leave courage in paper and pray someone better than I will one day use it. Gideon Wren bowed his head. Annie began to cry silently. Wade looked at the floor, his face working against grief. Those words reached into all the spaces he had kept locked. He had spent years thinking Lydia left because love had not been enough. Now a dead woman's hand was showing him love had been there, but buried under fear. Lydia lowered the paper. Preston's expression had changed. His smile was gone. His eyes moved from face to face, measuring the room and finding fewer friends than he expected. Still, he was not finished. A touching statement, he said, but a dead woman's suspicions do not overturn county records. No, Lydia said. She reached into the pouch and drew out the practice sheets Elias had carried. But his hand might. Elias placed the sheets on the pulpit rail, one beside another. Names filled the pages. Wade Harlan, written again and again. Lydia Wren. Martha Wren. Gideon Wren. Even Judge Harrow could not hide his reaction. His brows pulled together. He glanced at Preston, then quickly away. Preston's voice sharpened. Those could be anyone's marks. Deputy Martin Shaw stepped forward from the back of the church. His face showed the strain of a man deciding, in front of everyone, whether his badge served power or justice. Mr. Vale, Martin said, your office keeps land notices written in your own hand, does it not? Preston turned slowly toward him. Careful, deputy. Martin's jaw tightened. I have been careful all morning. I am tired of it. A woman in the second pew whispered, Good. Martin walked to the judge. Your Honor, with permission, I can fetch records from the land office. If these sheets match Mr. Vale's hand, we will all know soon enough. Judge Harrow opened his mouth, but the room was watching him too closely now. For the first time, he seemed aware that his own name might be tied to Preston's if he refused too much in public. Fetch them, he said stiffly. Preston's face darkened. This is unnecessary. Martin looked at him. Then you should not mind. The deputy left at once. The church doors swung shut behind him, and the waiting began. No one sat comfortably. People shifted in pews. A baby fussed near the back. A ranch hand removed his hat and twisted it in his hands. Reverend Bell stood near Lydia, one hand resting on the pulpit as if guarding the place from another lie. Preston moved toward the aisle. Wade stepped into his path. Going somewhere. Preston's eyes narrowed. Do not start a scene you cannot finish. You started it 12 years ago. And still you stand here with nothing but a ruined woman's tears and a child you met this morning. Wade's hand tightened at his side, but Lydia moved before he could answer. She stepped between them. The church held its breath. I am not ruined, she said. Preston stared at her. For years that had been the word she feared without hearing. Ruined. A woman alone. A child without a public father. A name people lowered their voices around. Preston had never needed to say it outright. He had built her life so the word followed her like dust. Now he had spoken it before the whole town. And somehow it had lost its power. Lydia lifted her chin. I was lied to, I was frightened. I was left to raise a child while men with clean coats protected their names, but I am not ruined. She turned slightly so the room could see Annie, and neither is my daughter. Annie wiped her cheeks and stood straighter. Wade looked at Lydia then with such quiet tenderness that her breath caught. It was not pity. It was not hunger for the past. It was respect. Deep, steady, grown from seeing her stand in fire and refuse to burn. If you have ever seen someone find their voice after years of silence, tell me in the comments. Would you have been brave enough to stand where Lydia stood? The church doors opened. Deputy Martin returned carrying a leather record book and 3 loose notices from the land office. Behind him came Sheriff Bell, older, broad-shouldered and grim. The sheriff's eyes swept the room and landed on Preston. Seems I missed a lively morning. Judge Harrow stiffened. Sheriff, this is a civil matter. Forgery is not civil, Sheriff Bell said. That sentence changed the air. Martin placed the records on the table near the pulpit. Elias, Reverend Bell, and the schoolteacher, Miss Abigail Pierce, were asked to stand as witnesses while Martin compared the writing. Miss Pierce had taught half the town's children their letters and had a sharp eye for handwriting. The church watched in thick silence. Martin laid one of Preston's official land notices beside the practice sheet. The slant of the W. The hook on the H. The narrow loop on the L. Miss Pierce leaned closer, then looked up. They match. Preston gave a short laugh. Many men write alike. Elias pointed at another line, then explained that. Near the edge of one practice sheet, almost hidden under repeated signatures, was a line written in Preston's own hand. Wade must never see the child. No one spoke. The words were plain, not legal, not polished, not easy to explain away. Annie read them too. Her face crumpled. Wade saw it, and every part of him wanted to shield her from the sentence, but he could not remove it from the page. All he could do was kneel beside her in front of the whole town. Annie, he said softly. She looked at him, tears on her cheeks. He knew. Wade's throat tightened. Preston had known. Somehow, all these years, he had known there might be a child. He had not merely separated 2 lovers. He had kept a daughter from her father with purpose written in ink. Lydia sank to her knees beside Annie. Sweetheart, listen to me. He knew, Annie repeated, voice breaking. He knew I had a father. Wade gently took her hand. Yes. The honest answer hurt, but Annie deserved truth now. Her small fingers clutched his. Did you want me? She asked. The question broke him. Wade did not care who watched. He did not care about Preston, the judge, the town, or the years. He only saw the child in front of him, asking the question a lie had planted before she was born. He placed one hand over his heart. Before I knew your name, I wanted the life your mother and I were supposed to have. If I had known you were in this world, there is no winter, no distance, No man in a fine coat that could have kept me from you." Annie stared at him through tears. "Truly, truly." Then she stepped into his arms. This time he did not hold back. He gathered her close, one hand careful against the back of her head, his eyes closed tight. Lydia wrapped her arms around both of them, and for a moment the three of them knelt together in the aisle of the church where a wedding should have happened 12 years before. Somewhere behind them, Gideon began to sob. The town saw it all. Not scandal. Not shame. A family made wounded by lies, but not destroyed. Sheriff Bell let the moment stand before he spoke. "Preston Vale." Preston had gone very still. The sheriff stepped closer. "I believe you should come with me." Judge Harrow rose quickly. "Sheriff, no formal charge has been entered." The sheriff did not look at him. "Then I will start with interference in county records and suspected forgery, and we can see how many more pages Mr. Vale helps us fill." Preston's face twisted. "You fools! You think one sentimental scene changes the law." "No," Martin said, "but evidence does." Preston looked at the side door. Wade saw it. So did the sheriff. "Do not," Wade said. Preston's eyes met his. For the first time there was no charm left in them. "You should have stayed poor and alone, Harlan." Then he lunged toward the side aisle. He did not get far. Two ranch hands near the door blocked him, and Sheriff Bell caught his arm. There was a brief struggle, nothing grand, no wild fight, only the ugly panic of a man whose power had finally found a wall. A paper fell from Preston's coat pocket and slid across the church floor. It stopped near Annie's shoe. She looked down. Lydia picked it up before the child could. Her face changed as she read it. Wade saw the color drain from her cheeks. "What is it?" he asked. Lydia handed it to him. It was not a land paper. It was a marriage license application, already prepared, naming Preston Vale as intended husband. And beside his name was Lydia Wren. Her signature had been forged at the bottom. The forged marriage paper trembled in Wade's hand. For a moment the whole church seemed to lose its breath. The people of Mercy Ridge had come expecting a dispute over guardianship, land, old love, and a child's name. But this paper showed something colder. Preston Vale had not only meant to take Annie from Lydia. He had meant to bind Lydia to himself by law, by ink, by another stolen signature. Wade looked at Lydia. Her face had gone white, but she did not fall apart. Not this time. The girl who once left Mercy Ridge with a broken heart and a false letter was gone. The woman standing there now had carried her daughter across miles of fear. She had opened sealed truth in front of a town. She had looked shame in the face and refused to wear it. Preston was held by Sheriff Bell and one of the ranch hands near the side aisle. His polished coat was twisted, his hat had fallen to the floor, and his face had turned hard with the rage of a man who had finally lost control of the room. "That paper means nothing," Preston snapped. Lydia turned toward him slowly. "Then why did you carry it?" He said nothing. Sheriff Bell took the paper from Wade and read it. His mouth tightened with each line. Judge Harrow stepped closer, suddenly careful now that so many eyes watched him. "That document has not been filed," the judge said. "No," Reverend Bell replied, his voice deep and firm, "but it was prepared." Preston looked at the Reverend. "Stay to your pulpit." "I am at my pulpit," the Reverend said. "That is why I know a wicked thing when it stands before me." A murmur moved through the pews. Lydia stepped toward Preston, not close enough for him to reach her, but close enough that he had to look at the woman whose life he had tried to write for her. "Why?" she asked. The word was soft, almost tired. Preston stared at her. "Why?" "Yes," she said. Why 12 years? Why Wade? Why my daughter? Why my father? Why my mother's grief? Why did you need to own every road I might take? Preston laughed once, bitter and low. Because you would have ruined yourself. No, Lydia said, I would have loved a good man. You would have married a rancher with debt and dirt under his nails. Wade did not move, but Annie's hand tightened around his. Lydia's eyes filled with fire. I would have married a man who built a porch for me with his own hands. Preston's jaw worked. I could have given you standing. You stole my home. I could have given your child a name. She already had one. Preston looked at Annie then, and for the first time the child did not shrink behind anyone. She stood between Wade and Lydia, tears dry on her cheeks now, her small shoulders straight. My name is Annie Harlan, she said. The words were not loud, but they reached every corner of the church. Wade closed his eyes for half a second. When he opened them, Lydia was looking at him through tears. Preston saw the look between them, and something in him broke past caution. She is nothing without my protection, he said. The church went silent. It was the last mistake of a man who had survived too long by speaking carefully. Annie flinched, but Wade knelt beside her before fear could settle back in. You hear me, Annie, he said, gentle but clear. No child is nothing, not ever, and you were loved before you were born, even when lies kept us apart. Lydia knelt too, smoothing a loose strand of hair from her daughter's face. Your grandmother knew it, I knew it, and your father knows it now. Annie looked from one to the other. Then, with a shaking breath, she stepped closer to Wade and whispered the word he had not dared ask for. Pa. Wade's face crumpled. He gathered her into his arms, holding her like something holy and fragile, something lost in a storm and found at daybreak. Lydia pressed one hand over her mouth, but she was smiling through her tears. The town saw it. That one word did what no court order could do. It told Mercy Ridge that the question before them was never only legal. It was human. It was a stolen father, a silenced mother, and a child finally standing where she belonged. Sheriff Bell cleared his throat, though his own eyes had softened. Preston Vale, you will come with me. Preston looked around the church, searching for someone who still feared him enough to help. Judge Harrow avoided his eyes. The men Preston had brought stood still near the wall, suddenly unwilling to be counted on the losing side. The townspeople watched him with the cold judgment of neighbors who had finally understood how much poison one respected man could pour into ordinary lives. You will regret this, Preston said. Gideon Wren stepped forward, old and bent, but no longer hiding. No, he said, I regret what I let you do. This is something else. Preston was led out through the church doors, not with drama, not with gunfire, not with the grand ending a proud man might imagine for himself. He left under the weight of paper, witnesses, and the truth he had spent 12 years trying to bury. Justice on the frontier did not always arrive clean. Sometimes it came late, with dust on its boots and grief in its hands. But that day, in the Mercy Ridge Church, it came. Judge Harrow did not remain long after Preston was taken. With Sheriff Bell watching, and half the town as witness, he declared that Annie would remain in Lydia's care until formal papers could be corrected. He also ordered the Briar Creek claim reviewed by the county office outside Mercy Ridge, where Preston's influence could not reach it. Deputy Martin gathered the forged papers. Elias Mercer signed a statement before the reverend and schoolteacher. Gideon Wren added his testimony with a trembling hand. Martha's sealed letter was copied and witnessed. The false guardianship agreement Preston had used to threaten Lydia was suspended pending review, and Sheriff Bell promised it would be examined for forgery as well. For the first time in 12 years, the law felt less like a door closing and more like one opening. By late afternoon, the crowd had thinned. People left quietly, some ashamed of whispers they had once repeated, others wiping their eyes as they passed Lydia. The mercantile woman who had stared earlier pressed a small parcel of bread and preserves into Annie's hands and said only, "For the road home." Home. The word followed them out of the church. Wade stood near the wagon as the sun dipped behind the roofs of Mercy Ridge. The sky had turned pale gold, and the cold had softened. Lydia came down the church steps with Annie beside her and Gideon behind them. For a moment, Wade saw what should have been years ago, Lydia walking from the church toward him, a child with his eyes between them, a future not yet ruined. Only this time the future was not a dream. It was tired, wounded, late, and real. Gideon stopped at the bottom step. "Lydia," he said. She turned. The old man held his hat in both hands. "I cannot ask you to forget." "I won't," she said softly. He nodded, accepting that. "And I cannot ask you to come home as if nothing happened." "No," she said, "you cannot." His eyes filled. "Then let me ask only this. Let me know my granddaughter. Let me spend whatever years I have left proving that cowardice is not the last thing I gave this family." Lydia looked at Annie. Annie stepped forward and took Gideon's hand. "You can start by coming to supper," she said. A broken laugh escaped Gideon. Lydia smiled, and for the first time, daughter and father looked at each other without Preston's shadow standing between them. Wade helped Annie into the wagon, then offered his hand to Lydia. She looked at it. 12 years lived in that pause, the dance where he had stepped on her hem, the porch he had built too wide, the false letters, the nights she had cried over a child he did not know existed, the mornings he had worked a ranch with her photograph hidden in his desk. Then she placed her hand in his. He helped her up, but neither of them let go right away. The ride back to Briar Creek was quiet. Annie fell asleep with her head against Lydia's shoulder, one hand still clutching the parcel of bread. Gideon rode behind on a borrowed horse, and Elias Mercer followed slowly, invited to stay the night because no one wanted him alone with Preston's men still loose in their thoughts. As the wagon rolled under the cottonwoods near Briar Creek, Lydia looked at the land opening around them. The creek shone silver in the evening. The barn stood warm with lamplight. A horse nickered from the corral. Smoke rose from the ranch house chimney because Wade's old cook, Mrs. Bellamy, had seen them coming from the ridge and started supper without being asked. Lydia's eyes filled again. "I dreamed of this place," she said. Wade kept his eyes on the road. "I did too. I dreamed it different." "So did I." She looked at him. "Can we begin with what is left?" Wade slowed the wagon near the porch. For a moment, he did not answer, not because he was unsure, but because he wanted to give the truth the care it deserved. "I do not want to pretend the years did not happen," he said. "They happened, they hurt you, they hurt Annie, they made me harder than I should have been." Lydia nodded. "But I know this," he continued. "When you stepped down from that stage this morning, I thought the past had come to punish me. Instead, it brought me my daughter." His voice roughened. "And it brought you back." Lydia looked down at their joined hands. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered. The words were not dramatic. They did not need to be. They came like water after drought. Wade turned toward her. "Neither did I." Annie stirred between them, sleepy-eyed. "Are we staying here?" Lydia brushed a kiss over her daughter's hair and looked at Wade. Wade smiled softly. "If you both want to." Annie looked around at the porch, the barn, the creek, the open sky darkening blue above the ranch. Then she nodded. "I want to." That night they ate supper around Wade's table, not as guests, not quite as a settled family yet, but as people brave enough to sit together while the future took shape. Annie asked questions about the horses. Gideon told a shy story about Lydia stealing apples as a girl. Elias admitted he had never liked Preston's handwriting, which made Annie laugh so suddenly that everyone at the table went quiet just to hear it. Later, after Annie had fallen asleep in the small room beside the kitchen, Lydia stood on the porch with Wade. The lantern beside the door moved in the wind. Beyond the fence, the land lay quiet under stars. Somewhere in the barn, a horse shifted. The world felt wide again. Wade reached into his coat pocket and drew out something small. Lydia looked down. It was not a new ring. It was the little silver heart from the blue ribbon, cleaned of dust, resting in his palm. "I cannot give you back 12 years," he said. Lydia's eyes shone. "I know, and I will not ask you for an answer tonight." Her gaze lifted to his. "But one day, when the papers are settled, when Annie feels safe, when you know this is a home and not another place you had to run to," he said, "I would like to ask you again at the creek." Lydia smiled through tears. "The same creek. The same creek. You still planning to kneel in the mud? If that is what it takes." She laughed softly, and the sound healed something in the night. Then she took the little silver heart and closed her fingers around it. "You may ask," she whispered, "and Wade Harlan this time, no forged letter in the world will answer for me." He looked at her in the lantern light, and for the first time in 12 years, the silence between them was not full of what had been stolen. It was full of what could still grow. Weeks passed. Preston Vale's papers were taken apart line by line. More families came forward with old doubts, old fees, old signatures that had never seemed right. Judge Harrow resigned before anyone asked him to. Sheriff Bell sent the evidence to the territorial court, and Preston's name, once spoken with respect in Mercy Ridge, became a warning instead. The north pasture at Briar Creek was cleared in Wade's name, with Martha Wren's payment honored at last. Annie's birth record was corrected with Lydia's consent, naming Wade Harlan as her father. No court took her from her mother. No man decided her worth in a quiet room. Spring came slowly to the valley. Grass softened the banks of Briar Creek. Cottonwood leaves opened green and bright. Lydia hung yellow curtains in the ranch house kitchen, and Wade stood in the doorway watching like a man seeing a dream return, wearing an apron and a tired smile. Annie learned to ride Dusty, the old mare from the corral. The first time she crossed the yard alone, Wade walked beside her with one hand near the saddle, pretending not to worry. Annie laughed and said, "Pa, I'm not made of glass." Wade answered, "No, but I only just found you." From the porch, Lydia heard it and turned away so they would not see her cry. In June, Wade took Lydia to the creek. The day was warm, the water clear, the grass high around them. Annie hid behind a cottonwood with Gideon, though she was not hidden well at all. Her giggles gave her away twice. Wade knelt in the mud. Lydia laughed before he even spoke. He held up a simple ring, made by the Mercy Ridge blacksmith from a piece of silver Wade had kept since boyhood. "I loved you when I was young," he said. "I loved you when I thought I had lost you. I loved you badly sometimes, quietly sometimes, stubbornly most times. But if you will have me, Lydia Wren, I would like to love you honestly for every year we have left." Lydia looked at him, at the man she had lost, found, doubted, forgiven, and chosen again. "Yes," she said, "before you ruined those trousers for nothing." Annie cheered from behind the tree. Gideon pretended not to cry. They married 2 weeks later in the Mercy Ridge Church, not to erase the first wedding that never happened, but to honor the truth that had survived it. Annie walked between them, carrying wildflowers in both hands. Martha's letter rested in Lydia's pocket, close to her heart. When Reverend Bell asked who stood with this family, half the town rose. And that was how Briar Creek Ranch became more than land, cattle, and fence lines. It became a place where lost years were spoken of without shame, a place where a woman's courage was remembered, A place where a child with gray-green eyes learned that love delayed was not always love denied. If this story found a place in your heart, subscribe for more romantic Wild West stories where love, pain, and truth meet under the frontier sky. Years later, folks in Mercy Ridge still talked about the morning Lydia returned holding a little girl's hand. Some remembered the scandal. Some remembered the church bell. Some remembered Preston Vale being led away with dust on his fine coat. But Wade remembered something smaller. A child touching his coat cuff and saying he had her eyes. Lydia remembered the porch, the frost, and the moment she stopped running. And Annie remembered the first time she called him Pa, and how his arms held her like he had been waiting her whole life. On summer evenings, when the sky turned gold over Briar Creek, Wade and Lydia would sit on the porch while Annie rode the old mare near the fence. The yellow curtains moved in the open window. The creek shone beyond the cottonwoods. The little silver heart hung beside Lydia's wedding ring on a fine chain around her neck. 12 years had been stolen. But not the rest. And sometimes on the frontier, the rest is where love writes its truest story.